Hello and welcome back from the networking break. This is your host, Tom Bechtold with SecureWorld Digital. You have entered into our next panel on cloud, power, and peril. All right, so welcome. I want to say thank you to our sponsors, Automox, Gigamon, and Sneak for making our panel possible, but also for helping make our virtual conference possible here in Texas. So thank you all. For your generous support and for lending us 3 of your experts. So we're going to be chatting with Mr. Christopher Haas, Director of Information Security and Research over at Automox. Actually, right now, since I've got you, Chris, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit about yourself and a little something on cloud that you feel is intriguing today.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm Chris Haas, Director of Information Security and Research here at Automox, and I kind of fill a lot of different roles here. Around both the security operations and IT operations for our startup. In the past, I've done a lot of work in the threat research and threat intel space. Worked for a few different firms like Cylance and Logarithm, and worked for the DoD for a little while. So my background is really in threat research and threat intel and tracking ATPs. In terms of advantages of using cloud technologies and adoption of cloud technologies, really just that. I think that the biggest thing is around general availability, 24/7 availability, to really kind of help out your organization to be able to react quickly, not only to threats, but also be able to empower your organization to be distributed. And I know that's a very important thing for our companies to be able to handle in these times with the pandemic that's still ongoing.
Excellent. Welcome. Appreciate it. And Chris was lucky he got to go first, so he got the softball on that one, I think. So we'll see what the other 2 come up with on there. So let's jump over to Mr. Jim Mandelbaum, field CTO over at Gigamon. Jim, give us a little bit about yourself and something about cloud.
No problem. And the fact that you stumbled on my last name means you are not a Seinfeld You're not a Seinfeld fan. Those of you who are Seinfeld fans absolutely are trying to yell at the screen and say my last name. So Mandelbaum for those of you who are Seinfeld fans. My background, I love to put humor in anything I do. I'm a security guy. I was a field CTO at RSA for many years. So security is in my core. And at Gigamon, obviously, I still talk security, but it's really around the cloud. It's really around visibility and how you enable security to become more effective and actually protecting and understanding where your responsibility lives and where the vendor's responsibility lives in the cloud. And I think one of the things in going to your question, what do I think is really interesting about the cloud? I think that there is a lack of understanding of the shared security model of the cloud. And I'm sure we're going to touch upon that during this conversation. But I think it's important for those of you who are looking at the cloud or are moving or have moved to the cloud to step back and go to the shared security model of your cloud vendor or vendors and get an understanding of what you're responsible for and what they're responsible for. I think you're going to find a little surprise there.
Yeah, I imagine there's a little bit of a gap involved there with what.
Quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. I like that one. Let's jump over to Mr. Steve Kinman, Field CISO over at Sneak. Steve, give us a little bit about yourself and something interesting about cloud.
Cool. So I have recently joined Sneak as the field CISO. I'm on week 4. I just returned from 3.5 years in Germany, where data privacy is real and scary. The company I worked for there was a large e-commerce company, and it was built on cloud, but was going through a pretty aggressive cloud transformation because it grew so fast and the hypergrowth was so incredible that security was the last word on everyone's mind. And I think that's what I would say is interesting to me about cloud. You can for sure meet your business goals, you can meet revenue goals, you can meet your stockholders' dreams and desires, but there's always that cleanup effort that has to come if you do grow that fast. Cloud allows you to grow fast, and security and privacy and compliance and governance, which is really my background more than deep security, I think is super important.
Excellent. Well, welcome. Happy to have you, sir. let's jump into this, huh? Let's get to kind of a state of the cloud, if you guys will. So I want to give each of our panelists here an opportunity to just kind of dive in a little bit. Give me one. You already kind of gave me one thing about cloud, but give me something else. Give me a concern, and maybe how to thwart that concern, if you will. But each one of you guys have a different one, if you wouldn't mind. Kind of keep them brief. Let's start with. Let's go with Jim. Jim, start us off. I think you're on mute.
Welcome to 2021 again. Now, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
all right,
it's
so
usually me.
I'll take that one too. So I think what's interesting is I had a call with the CISO last week, and we were talking about his organization's journey to the cloud. And he said something that really resonated. And I think a lot of people said, hey, we got to get to the cloud, cloud's first initiative. Let's lift and shift and move everything to the cloud. Then he said we started looking at cost analysis, and all of the return on investment we had planned really wasn't there. So we kind of looked at it and said, let's pull stuff back on-prem. And he referred to it, and I love this term, that's why I brought up the bipolar view of the cloud. We want to do the cloud, we need to move to the cloud, but maybe we don't want to do the cloud yet. So I think it's important to understand that as you move to the cloud, understand what your costs are going to be, what your expenses are going to be, because I think you're going to find most of the time the ROI you expected isn't going to be there. So ROI can't be the reason of moving to the cloud. As one of the other members of the panel said in his journey over in Germany, it was really easy to get the apps, the high availability, the resiliency, making it region-based because he's in Germany, you've got GDPR concerns. But that's great. But when you started looking at the costs associated to it, it wasn't what you expected. So understanding the costs going in are really critical, and I don't think people do enough of that research.
It's a valid point. I really like that one. Good. Thanks, James. Chris, what would you add on to this?
I really actually like that point. A lot of people go and rush to the cloud over the last couple of years of the pandemic, and it's important to realize that cloud is not something new. It's been around for a long time. There's been a lot of services that have been in the cloud. This isn't something that's just cropped up in the last couple of years because of remote work coming into play and the rapid adoption of cloud over the last couple of years. But you can kind of see it's really important to have an open mind when it comes to cloud adoption, right? So you might think that you need everything up in one specific provider, and then you might find that you want to move into a multi-cloud, so you might have something in AWS, and then you might want something in GCP because you like their data analytics platform better, GCP than AWS or something like that. So I think it's really important that you make sure that you're have a well thought out plan, but also have open-mindedness to be able to be flexible, which is what's one of the best things about being cloud native, to be able to be as flexible as possible. Maybe even you want to do a hybrid cloud where you have your dev environments on bare metal and a colo somewhere, so you have that extra visibility or things that you're lacking from cloud native tools, and then you have your production environment up in the cloud, so it's high availability for your customers. There's just a lot of different options you can do. It's not usually just as easy as just saying, I'm just going to lift and shift everything to the cloud as we discussed earlier. On one provider, there's a lot of things that go into it now, and I think that you're kind of seeing with this rapid adoption to these cloud platforms, you're seeing people step back and say, well, all this money that I was going to spend actually isn't as lucrative as I thought it was. Maybe we need to be a little more flexible there, things like that. So that's a little point for me on that side.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. And let's check in with Steve. Steve, what's a concern that you're thinking about here?
Well, I have to follow up those two presentations with my opposite view there. So I'm a cloud guy by heart. I was infrastructure as a service when it was early, and IBM Cloud and other things. And so totally a cloud guy. So when I put my CISO hat on, I want everything to be done in the least amount of options as possible. So if you want to use multi-cloud, great, but put everything in cloud. I would rather outsource my infrastructure needs and requirements and some of the security to a provider instead of having to add layers to data centers or legacy data centers or bare metal that's on my premise or something like that. So anyway, I think that's one of the great benefits of cloud, and one of the cool things is I think there is quite a bit of capabilities and assurances that the cloud companies can make, but you do have to have a good shared responsibility matrix, as Jim mentioned early on. So, total cloud guy here. Please stop doing it in data centers and go cloud.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd love to give a rebuttal on that. And I always love having this conversation between us as well. So I don't disagree that moving to the cloud makes perfect sense. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't do the cloud. But what I'm saying is we have to be realistic. And we have to understand what our costs are, what makes the most sense. But we also have to recognize that most enterprises have investments that they've made in their on-prem. So they've gone out and bought next-gen firewalls. They've gone out and built web application firewalls. They've gone out and spent all this money. And they have to show prudent use of the funds. So if I've gone out last year and bought some expensive gear, I have a depreciation of that gear over the next 3 to 5 years. So if I go and just lift and shift to the cloud and don't make use of the spend that I made on the gear for the on-prem, and I don't utilize that depreciation of the spend, I'm not looking at the best interest of my organization and the spend that I've done. So I agree with you that the cloud is a great way to go, and I think hybrid cloud is the reality of the world today. And I think the reason for that is exactly the fact that I just mentioned, that we have investment that is still being made on-prem. If you look at the spend in the corporate world, unfortunately, the majority of the spend is still in the hardware for the on-prem data center. So we have to understand that there is depreciation that has to be recognized. There is that legacy. There is the lack of knowledge for people to feel comfortable to say, hey, I've got these staff and I got to move to the cloud. They're not ready yet. So I've got to ramp up. I've got to make that journey. So I think I have a little bit of a different feel on that. I understand why you're saying going to the cloud makes a lot of sense, but I also think we have to be a little realistic that lift and shift and just all out force is probably not going to be there for a few more years. I think we need to realize that investment is still being made on-prem.
Anything back at that, Steve?
No, I actually agree. I think, I had the best of both worlds where I came from. It was a very cloud-centric company. It was born on the cloud, but the cloud wasn't quite ready in 2009 when they were born. And so they did have to do a lot of things in legacy. And so now it is how do we get out of legacy data centers? How do we get out of those spends and put it in the cloud? So not every company is ready for that. But as a CISO, as a knowing what I'm trying to secure, knowing what I have to secure and where it lives, I would much rather be in one or two clouds and know what I'm looking at, even though cloud makes that very difficult in its own right. So, but yeah, I totally understand his point of view.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's jump to our next section. I think this one is actually for the audience members. So yeah, we have an audience question. Audience members, what threats concern you most about the cloud? So you kind of heard some of the stuff from our panelists. What's keeping you up at night? Type out some responses in that Q&A chat box. We'd love to hear from you guys, and we'll join in that dialogue as well and type out some answers for you. So what's concerning you about cloud out there in the audience? So give us some food for thought. Let's check in back on our panel questions. So here, what I'd like to do here, if we can, is try to share some real-life examples, if you have some, based on the questions that I've got. So on this first one, I'm going to go ahead and, let's see here. There's actually a lot of variety here. Okay, I don't like those questions. I'm going to give you a harder one. Let's see. And you guys could just chime in on it. Let's see. Many cloud services are insecure by default. How can organizations balance the work required to secure cloud services deployed in production? Anybody want to grab that one? It's a tougher one.
I'll start with that. I find that an interesting statement. I think that clouds inherently are secure by nature. I mean, if you think about it, if you go into Azure, AWS, or Google and you deploy something, you can't get to it. If I deploy 2 instances, they can't even talk to each other, but because by default, everything is off. And so we have to open the holes to allow that to happen. The problem is that we're so used to working in an on-prem world that we just turn on and open everything, that we haven't quite gotten our mind around the cloud differences. And so a lot of people say that the cloud is so different from my networking people. It's really not. It's just a frame of mind that has to change. So we deploy an S3 bucket and we forget to lock it down. We don't do simple things that on-prem we don't really need to do, but in the cloud, like how about turning on multi-factor authentication to the root accounts? By default, they're not turned on. So there is one of your weaknesses. Turn on MFA. I think that a lot of it is really around the mindset and just changing how we think and least privileges and changing to say, what really do I need to turn on and enable versus let's open it up and then start locking it down. Instead, let's leave it locked down and only open the pieces I have to. It's just a change of mind, because I think that the cloud for vendors by their design is everything is off. Now you get the choice of what to turn on.
Okay. Let's shift gears on that a little bit. You had mentioned something earlier on, but I want to try to get one of the other panelists to respond. How do you work the maintenance stuff on this? I mean, we talked about like you have to really know what's going on in the contract, who's doing what, but is it always the case where you have to do the maintenance? I mean, who does the maintenance? And then also, how do you perform like a risk assessment in the cloud? So, Chris, I'm going to throw that one at you. Don't be mad at me.
Yeah, I can definitely hit on the risk assessment part in the cloud. One, it starts with having a trained and knowledgeable security team that is familiar with cloud technologies, right? I think that's a big thing that we're seeing now in the industry is that, we've had a lot of, there's obviously a cybersecurity skills gap to an extent, and the cloud technologies and securing clouds, such as like securing Kubernetes and securing, Terraform and a lot of different other cloud native technologies is not exactly as mature as how we lock down domain control or things like that. So I think that there's one starts with training and understanding and training up your security team to make sure that you understand how you secure threats, and then also how you would actually experience a threat, a cloud-based threat in your organization. So one of the things that we do a lot within my organization is we do a lot of purple team exercises. A lot of times those purple team exercises start with a compromised Kubernetes cluster or a compromised piece of our cloud infrastructure that we have to respond to in certain threats. And that really helps you kind of like realize whether or not that risk is a real risk, because you can do threat modeling and you can do risk assessments all day, but until you've actually practiced responding to those threats, making sure you have run books for responding to those threats on a timely basis and making sure that you have controls in place for those. It's all just down on paper. So you might get into a point where you think you have a certain threat really, really locked down, that it's not a big risk to your organization. It comes to happen that maybe you experience an incident of said threat, and then you realize that none of the controls that you have in place that you've implemented over the last year are something that actually works or gets bypassed by some threat actor. So, it's really, there's been a lot of techniques that have been developed over the last few years for purple teaming and active pen testing in the cloud. Wasn't as welcomed by AWS or other vendors in the past, but now it is. So you're at a really not only have a skilled team to be able to identify if there's a risk, but also be able to put that to action and have that tactile feedback on whether or not you have a coverage there.
Excellent. And let's jump over to Mandelbaum. Now I'm going to use your last name forever.
I'm okay with that. Got to say it 3 times if you're going to do it. All right. So I like your answer. I agree with your answer. However, there's also the low-hanging fruit. I think one of the things that people don't understand is that the vendors themselves are trying their best to help you. Now, they're not going to be everything because, again, I encourage everybody to go in and look at the shared security model, and you'll understand where they fit and where you fit. They don't really care about your data. And I always love that they, people, well, enough Amazon S3 bucket breaches, Amazon's going to care. They don't care. That's not their responsibility. But they do have tooling to try to help you. Now, it's not everything. I mean, it's not everything Steve talked about and what it's going to do for you, but there is something called the trusted advisor. And the Trusted Advisor is a tool that is part of AWS that you run. And there's two different versions. One is if you're a general member, and one if you're a business member, it does more. But the point is that it goes out, looks at your entire account, goes through all of your VPCs, and looks at all the basic security gaps that it finds and gives you a full report on these are the things that we think you should work on, right? And so I think we're neglecting some of the low-hanging fruit, and I think that we need to take advantage of it. And I think that it's neglected quite often.
Steve, did you have something on the low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I come from a compliance regulatory framework background. That's where I live, and so I think when I hear low-hanging fruit, to me that screams framework. Like, what are you building towards, and what baselines do you have in place? Are you building on a secure foundation? So with that shared responsibility matrix, you know where AWS or GCP is keeping you secure, and you know where you start. And you have to start putting in your building blocks at that place. So you can't skip one. They're all very important. They're all connected. And so baselines, securing the foundation, and then monitoring those and improving those as you go is just as important. And so I think that's where some folks get into trouble with cloud is they don't understand that shared responsibility matrix. They don't know where it stops and starts, like Jim said very well. But it's absolutely critical that you do. And you hear people talk about shifting left. I think shifting left also goes down into infrastructure as a service and infrastructure as code and all of those things now. I just think that's super important for a good security posture in cloud.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Let's shift gears a little bit here. Go to our next one here. Visibility in the cloud. So obviously this is you can't protect what you don't know about, right? So Steve, why don't you talk a little bit about visibility? How do you do that, especially if you're working with multiple clouds? How does this work?
So I think from my point of view in this panel, it's really more of my horror story and how I've solved it. So maybe Jim can tell me some good ways to make this better for me. But I can tell you from past experience that I have 10 different applications where I have to go find assets. Data is an asset, networks an asset, all of this code is now an asset. Third-party vendors are assets now in this web of cloud. And so I have a vision of what I would love it to look like, and I haven't quite got there yet. But in total, I agree. If you don't know what you're trying to protect, you can't protect it. And so there's so many different ways and so many different ways you consume data that you have to have a way to process that data and understand where your risks are. And so that's my take on it is I don't have that visibility I need as a CISO today. And so that's where I think there's lots of risks that CISOs don't know about. And Jim, maybe you can help with how my brain thinks of that.
Absolutely. So Gigamon is a visibility company. This is our forte. This is what we do. And to me, this is the softball layup. This is, hit it out of the park here. So first of all, you have to understand, to your point, you can't protect what you can't see. And that's what we completely do. So forget the Gigamon piece of it, but just from a visibility perspective, you need to make sure that you're seeing all the traffic. So you can't protect what you don't see, which means that you need to deal with, there are some built-in capabilities around some of the visibility. So each of the vendors have some built-in visibility. Problem is it's usually based on logs, which we all know logs can be altered and logs can be deleted and modified. So the ultimate source of truth is going to be network in motion. So I need to be able to look at the packets. And so what Gigamon is really good at is leveraging native APIs into all the different clouds, public, private, on-prem, in the cloud, getting that traffic, and then taking that traffic, aggregating that traffic into a common area, which then we can service the tools. And one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about is that while you can get into all of that cloud traffic, it's really important that we just don't take and say, oh, okay, here's all my traffic, and I want to send all my traffic at that tool, because we know that tools can't handle that kind of load. So one of the things that's important is to start looking at things like network packet brokers in the cloud and aggregators in the cloud, where we can manipulate the traffic, where we can reduce the traffic load, where we can provide relevant traffic to the right tool. So if I've got something that's doing application performance monitoring, it's only looking at the apps you care about. If I'm looking at network performance monitoring, I'm only looking at certain network segments that I care about. If I'm doing forensic analysis, maybe I do need everything. And so visibility in the cloud to us and to me is really, I need to see everything. It needs to be dynamic, because we know one of the things that happens in the cloud is it's automatic scale. So as compute gets busy, they start building up and adding more compute, which means as that compute comes live, they have to be seen. I have to know what's going on. As I do things, if I'm doing Kubernetes, as different pods are getting spun up, and so those containers are starting to manipulate data, those dynamic building of those different pods, that traffic needs to be seen in real time. And so from a Gigamon perspective, that's what we preach and what we believe. And so it's not only just about getting all the data, but it's making sure that the right data gets to the right place. And I know I sounded a little preachy, but it really is important, because I know that we're going to talk about shadow IT. And I know, and I'm not trying to steal your thunder, but when we get there, I do want to address that, because shadow IT is different in the cloud than it is on-prem. And I won't steal that thunder. I'll let someone else take it, but I do want to come back to that as well. So I'm going to stop for a second and let somebody else chime in if they want to.
Yeah, either guy, you want to jump in on this one? Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, excellent. Actually, next question is for the audience. So let's take a look at this one, audience. Let's collaborate. What are you doing out in the audience to tackle the shadow IT problem within your organization? Odds are you probably have somebody doing it, right? Hopefully you don't, but it's possible. Let's see here. You're doing it?
I'm always doing it.
I probably am too, honestly. So audience members, share that with us. Type something out. Throw it in the Q&A, the chat, whatever we're calling that box down there. And let's talk about that in the typed out panel. So let's go to our next one. It is the shadow IT one. So let's talk about this for a bit. So Chris, I said Chris could start this one. So Chris, why don't you start this one off? Tell us something about shadow IT that we need to be concerned with.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different areas in terms of shadow IT, right? I think there's kind of two-pronged. One, shadow IT that happens in your cloud environment, and shadow IT from cloud applications, right? So you might not have the visibility, within your organization of legacy tooling, and that visibility that you get from other tooling that is cloud native can help you really combat that shadow IT portion. So I don't see it as a negative here. In some ways, I see it as a positive, because some applications can definitely give you visibility and combat shadow IT that doesn't require you being on the network, or doesn't require you being on the VPN and things like that. Automox is one of those tools. But then you also have, shadow IT in the cloud, where you maybe not know what applications are all being used from the cloud standpoint, because you don't have that visibility into that network visibility that you have from remote workforces and things like that, right? So maybe you're as an organization have document stores and Google Drive, but maybe you have employees that are storing things in Box because they like Box and they've used Box in the past, but you don't have that visibility to identify those things. So especially from a remote standpoint and a security standpoint, it can be very difficult to get that kind of network visibility into your endpoints, right? And then you also have kind of similar problem to an extent when you're working inside these cloud providers and within the big three of AWS, Azure, and GCP and things like that, where you might have shadow IT coming from a development team that has over privileges that are spinning up services that you don't know about or haven't been approved from a security standpoint, and introducing third-party risk. And there's a lot of different things that are out there. Really, I think visibility is a huge problem, especially from a remote standpoint. But I'm sure Jim has some good insights there, as he alluded earlier in our last question. So that's kind of what my big problems is just there's a lot of tooling out there that has not really translated to what we've been pushed into over the last 2 years. It just has this legacy mindset of as long as you're on your corporate network, then you have visibility. But we're just not there anymore. We're not really connecting to a corporate VPN as much anymore. We're not all going into the office anymore. So it can be very difficult if you're still utilizing legacy platforms.
Definitely. Jim, talk to us.
Sure. So here's what's funny about it. We think about shadow IT. Back in the olden days, and I raised my hand because I'm guilty of it, we took a box that wasn't being used anymore, loaded a Windows server on it or a Linux host on it, and turned it into a server underneath the desk for your department or your division or even certain applications. God knows who's manning it, who's securing it. That was legacy shadow IT. Today, I'm spinning up compute instances. As he said, that we've just got people going out there, they're spinning up instances. You have no way of knowing what's being put in there. You have no idea, is it patched, is it maintained, any of that. The difference is it's no longer under a desk, it's running on someone else's metal in a virtual space. And so the first thing that we got to deal with, number one, is visibility. We got to know it happened. So, again, I'm not trying to plug Gigamon, it's just part of the visibility. We need to have a tool that goes out and says, hey, I see additional compute being spun up. Let me grab that compute, add that into the mix to your tooling, and, oh, by the way, your tooling now sees additional compute. That's number one. So we have to know it exists. Number two, we have to understand what does that do to my company from a risk or compliance issue. So we know that we had Steve working in Germany, and he's got to deal with GDPR. He's also got to deal with the strictest security measures in the planet, because they have a reasonable expectation of privacy in the organization. The corporation doesn't own the data. The individual that put it there does. So that's a total flip on security and rules. So by putting that data, am I now in violation of standards? So understanding that it exists, getting visibility into it, understanding what compliance it may or may have not violated, and then mitigating that from a real-time perspective, all comes back to shadow IT is alive, it's well, it's rampant, and visibility is the only way to try to get a handle on it.
Okay. Steve, what do you think?
Well said. Real life examples, I kind of live by those. So one of my favorite stories, a company called The Planet many years ago, dedicated hosting. We had our NOC. In our NOC, we had a raised floor. We were moving offices once, and we were taking out the raised floor, and we found this server underneath the raised floor. The NOC guys, after that, told us that was called Subterranean, and that was where we hosted all of our Napster tunes to the tune of gigabytes back then. So, think about that now, like he was saying, with data in Germany or anywhere, California, whatever it is. And you have all these things like this that are still possible now, but much easier. You didn't have to, run a cable under your floor or put a server under there. You just go use the next piece of software that's cool. Where I came from, we had hundreds, and I don't even know how many hundreds of SaaS applications in use. And so one thing that we did was, it was about awareness. Like we got feedback from our users. We wanted to know what was convenient and why they were using it instead of using the approved, secure, well-known pieces of software and tools that we had available for them. And it was always the same answer. The process is too hard. The process is too cumbersome. Procurement takes too long. There's no way we can wait, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we started targeting instead of doing detection and things like that, which are great. We started targeting, like, how can we make a developer's life easier, a finance person's life easier, a marketing person's life easier, and reduce that friction that allowed them to do their job. So that's where we had a lot of focus there. And I think that really made good inroads. Germany made it very difficult when it came to data because of the privacy aspect, and you had to run everything through legal. But as best we could, we tried to reduce friction and allow people to do their job as fast as they could to meet their deadlines, to meet their goals, and things like that. And that really helped. So I think that's an important piece of that puzzle.
I think so too. I mean, the people aspect, a lot of times it just gets forgotten. You have to really understand what's important to the people that you're affecting. So
Yeah, and you bring up the people is important. I guess what we also need to neglect to talk about is why is the shadow IT happening? I guess the question we don't ask is why does shadow IT happen? And that's because that the users are looking for, they're your clients, right? The users of your services are your clients, and your clients are saying they need something you're not providing them. And therefore, that's why shadow IT exists. So I think if we did a better job of communicating with our clients, that shadow IT would be reduced. But we can't assume it's not there, which means to everybody's conversation points, all the talking points around compliance initiatives, around visibility initiatives, around regional aspects and expectations, all of that has to be part of that entire thing. But it all boils down to the client's need. That's the reason it happens.
Yep, exactly. If you're not getting your needs fulfilled, you're going to go somewhere else. That's just human nature. Excellent. Appreciate it. Thank you. Let's see here. Let's move on. By the way, does anybody know what that building is? People in the audience probably do.
Is that the Alamo?
It is, actually. Yes. Good job. 5 points. Way to go, Manobomb, Manobomb.
I said it 3 times.
I can't even say it 3 times.
I have to go find that Seinfeld reference and
I'm gonna have to watch it now.
Yep.
Just so I can say it right.
Type my last name. It'll come up. Don't worry. Lots of videos.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, moving on to our next one. I have to feel like we have to get into a little bit of access, identity, zero trust, right? I mean, let's talk about this stuff for a bit. Any of you guys? I feel like Jim, you're going to jump right on this one. Go for it. I mean, start us off.
Okay. All right. So the funny thing is, I told you guys my background. I came from RSA, which is secure ID, multi-factor. That's the big bread and butter at RSA. And so zero trust identity and MFA SSO is the bread and butter. And I think, to me, I talked about it already, low-hanging fruit. Turn on multi-factor to your accounts in your AWS, Azure, and Google. It's free. It's amazing. AWS did a study last year where they released a report on how many privileged accounts had MFA turned on. It was 32%. My God. So that means 68% of the root accounts are still using usernames and passwords. And passwords suck. We all know that. You can make it as complex as you want. It means nothing. I will find it somehow. I'll buy it from an admin leaving a coffee shop and give them some cash, and they'll take the money and give it to me. We already know that. There's studies on that. But it's sad but true. So I think a couple things have to happen. Number one, let's take the low-hanging fruit. I say it all the time because that's where we get our quick wins. Turn on MFA. Access. If you've got multi-factor auth, you've also got single sign-on. Let's take advantage of single sign-on, because single sign-on means that I'm not typing a password. I'm relying on the already stepped-up credential of that MFA. Let's take advantage of it. And zero trust, it's so hard to get there. To say I want to do zero trust, it's very difficult, because I can start looking at individuals and saying, do individuals need access to an app? Or if they do need access to an app, what do they actually need within the app? Where I'm now starting to get into identity governance. But zero trust really gets hard when I'm talking about non-carbon based life forms, when I start talking about machines, when I start talking about OT and IoT devices. Zero trust in that area gets very difficult. I mean, zero trust can be a 5-hour webinar just on its own. But I think if we look at the simpler, the easier things, where we start looking at identity, MFA, and single sign-on through standards like SAML and OAuth, and start leveraging the stuff that's built into the cloud vendors, we can eliminate a very large chunk of the weaknesses of our cloud services.
Excellent. Thank you. Anybody joining in on this one? Chime in, brother? Chris?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. As MFA is and zero trust is like one of the biggest things in terms of thwarting, password-based attacks, which are still a huge part of any phishing attempts, right? Like a lot of the main initial access vectors typically from credential stuffing or phishing attempt or something like that to grab credentials, and really just having a strong zero trust model and MFA turned on is really important for you to be able to thwart those types of attacks. From a security standpoint, we could talk all day about how you get some huge security gains from just doing that one basic thing, and it's kind of scary seeing that those statistics are so low for those that have adopted that. But I think you will see it going. It will continue to go up as more and more people adopt cloud technologies. But I think there's another point that we don't talk about in security, that you can not only pitch this as a security game, but also an efficiency game within your organization, right? If all the applications that you're having under your umbrella all support SAML, all support any type of MFA provider, getting access to all those things and only having to log in once a day is actually pretty efficient, and it actually really contributes to the happiness of your developers and the happiness of your general workforce. I don't have to go through these extra hoops just to get my emails sent out. I don't have to go through these extra hoops to access my documents. There's a huge efficiency gain that I think we kind of neglect when it comes to security talking about it, because that kind of helps you combat some of those lazy things that happen. That could contribute to shadow IT or really any other type of security vector that might be left open. So, yeah, definitely big points there on needing to be able to adopt zero trust and adopt technologies that allow you to get there as close as you can. It's also, I think it's an interesting point, is a lot of people talk about zero trust as it's like a something you can actually obtain. I feel like it's more of a journey. It's a continuous kind of reaching towards this zero trust idea, but I don't know that there's ever really a finish line. It's just something that you want to try to always get to, right? So that's kind of my thoughts there.
More of a continuous journey, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Tom, just one quick thing on that. I think from the boardroom, supervisory board, things like that, everybody wants to be more secure, but everybody wants more efficiency, as Chris was saying. And so work faster, do better things, but be secure. And I think zero trust, the way you have that identity and access management set up, is key to that, because you don't want to make the boardroom angry. So
definitely, you don't want to make them mad, for sure. Continued employment is at risk. Good point. Thank you. We're getting kind of tight on time, so I'm going to kind of jump here. I do want to ask the audience, though, real quick, take a look at your screen there right in the middle if you're multitasking out there in the audience. What's one of the biggest benefits that you've recognized since you've switched to using either cloud services in general, maybe for the first time, or you've maybe added more cloud services? So we'd love to hear it. Throw it out there. And, honestly, maybe somebody else in the audience hasn't recognized that, and you throwing that out there will help them. So please share that information. We're here to collaborate, right? So that being said, I do want to give each of our panelists here an opportunity to give the audience some homework. So Steve, let's start with you, since you just happen to be on camera with me right now. What's something that the audience can maybe start doing, tomorrow, Monday, whatever, but something that they can start doing fairly immediately to make their cloud posture a bit more secure?
I would like to say it's one quick sentence, but it's not. But my one quick sentence is find a framework, any framework, embrace a framework, and build towards it with all your security thoughts, desires, needs. Don't just do them ad hoc, and you'll make better progress that way, and you will know a little bit more about your risk and where they lie.
That was pretty short and sweet. I like that. That was good. Thank you, Steve. Over to James.
Okay, I'm going to give you two. And if you don't already know what I'm going to give you, you weren't paying attention to me. So let's go there. So the first one is, please go review your provider or providers, for those of us in multi-cloud environments. What is your responsibility? What is their responsibility? Understand what that shared model is so that you know what you have to do. And secondly, go turn on 2FA. Go turn it on in your cloud provider. It's really, really easy to do. That'll protect you more than you think.
Yeah, please turn that on. I can't agree more with you on that one alone, right? I mean, come on. Okay, Chris, what's the homework assignment?
My homework assignment is just go learn as much as you can about cloud. It's not going anywhere. It's something that everybody's need to adopt and people understand. And the deeper your understanding of cloud technologies, the better you are at communicating it with your shareholders. So the better you are with understanding our threats and our attack vectors and how you can mitigate those things within a cloud solution, or how you mitigate those threats that come from cloud. It's just really important for you to be able to understand that at a deep technical level, and then be able to convey that at a higher non-technical level to your shareholders to really kind of get things moving within your organization, because you have to make sure that you have buy-in from all your shareholders, and the deeper technology that you understand, it makes it a little bit easier for you to convey things to your outstanding shareholders. So go grab a subscription, or go do AWS certification, or really just anything out there. There's tons of free applications you can use to learn about cloud technologies, and a lot of platforms you can get on there for pretty cheap amounts. So just go learn as much as you can about cloud.
There you go. Plus, you got the CSA out there. You can learn more from them as well. So they always partner with us at these events. So the cloud folks, check them out. Good folks to know. Excellent. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Christopher Haas, Jim Mandelbaum, Steve Kinman, thank you so much for lending our audience your expertise for the 45 minutes we had today. I want to say thank you to Sneak, Automox, and Gigamon for helping us make this possible. Be sure to pop by their booths. They have some great resources on cloud. Whether it's your first endeavor into it, or you've been doing it for a while, you probably need some help, or you wouldn't be at the conference today. So be sure to pop into those booths. They've got some awesome resources there. They got some really cool people working the booths too. And frankly, they have some really neat prizes too. All three of these companies are part of Dash for Prizes. So you can pop in there and try to win a prize while you're trying to learn something too, right? So there you go. You can already get Chris's homework done just by popping into their booth. How easy is that? All right, excellent. You guys, we got to get you off to the next sessions here. So thank you all for joining us for Cloud, Power, and Peril. This concludes the panel, and we'll see you at the next round of sessions. Have a great rest of the day, and enjoy the rest of the conference.